I would encourage you not to come to class and to rely on the podcast to get the audio of the lectures afterwards. I have kids. I get sick plenty of times. I don't need you guys to help me get sick. I encourage you to take advantage of that. Apart from that, I would actually encourage you not to rely on the podcast, but to come to lecture instead, because it's more fun that way. The webcasting service has also added a new feature as of this semester, and that is that they will also make available the slides from the lectures. Or at least that's what they say they will do, as of now. And they asked if I would agree to let that be a feature for this class, and I said yes. I don't know how it works. I don't know how well it will work. And I also realize that most of you would rather get them beforehand anyway. So I'm going to keep posting them ahead of time to DSpace, and you can get them that way. But tell me if it works. If you end up finding the webcast version of it more convenient or equally convenient, then maybe I won't have to post them to DSpace anymore. I don't know how well it's going to work. It's brand new, and I just agreed to it because for the most part, I've been very pleased with how the webcast service has functioned for classes. Any questions about that? Requirements. 25% of your grade depends on discussion, section, attendance, and participation. 20% depends on your midterm. We will hand out the midterm exam at the end of lecture on the 25th of February and ask you to turn it in at the beginning of lecture on March 4th. It will consist of 3 to 5 questions of the kind of essay variety, and we will ask you to pick 2 of those questions and answer them, such that the total of your midterm will amount to approximately 8 to 10 pages double-spaced. And again, you'll have a week, roughly, to write that midterm. On April 22nd, in lecture, you will have to turn in a 5 to 6... Yes, I'm sorry. If there is a strike, I will modify the necessary dates. If you want to turn it earlier, that would be fine. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The paper, we'll talk more about it over the course of the semester. It will be your opportunity to take up an issue, either that we've covered or something else that you would like to look into that relates to the class in some fashion, and do some research and write a paper. It is a research paper. The intention is that you will formulate an argument, engage it with scholarly research, learn in the process how to use scholarly research materials. In other words, how to do a paper based on research that isn't just Google and Wikipedia. And we will help you understand how to do that and understand that it's actually not that much harder than Google and Wikipedia, believe it or not. There will be a final exam on May 13th, and it will be 35% of your grade. Any questions about requirements? Yeah. Yes, if you have DSP accommodations, I will already have been notified about it, and you should talk to your GSI, and we will make the appropriate arrangements. Anything else? Some rules. We ask that you come to class prepared to participate. That means you will have already done the reading for the lecture that I'm going to give. I will tell you at the end of each lecture what that reading is. Actually, it's in the syllabus. It's pretty clear. We ask you to do that reading beforehand so that we can actually talk about these things and have a dialogue discussion within lecture. We ask that you turn off your cell phones. If they ring in class, the person to your left is entitled to answer, or a GSI or myself, and have a conversation with whoever's calling you. Okay? We ask that you not surf the web, text message, do your email, whatever, that kind of thing in class. I realize it might be really fun, but you could just as well be doing it someplace else, and it can also be very distracting to your neighbors. We ask that you not sleep. Each lecture, at roughly the midpoint, there will be a 5-minute break. That should give you a chance to wake up and go outside and fall asleep if that's what you want to do. It also means everyone gets a chance to stretch their legs, whatever, use the restroom. I can't promise exactly when it'll happen. It'll be 5 minutes long. It'll break things up and allow us to remain awake, despite the fact that this is roughly just after lunch. Finally, and this is important, if you have any issues or concerns that you want to voice, things you need to resolve, please take them up with your GSI first. If you can't get it resolved with your GSI or you're not happy with how it gets resolved, then by all means bring it to me. But please go through your GSI, because in most cases your GSI can handle it, and I don't have the time to be the front line of dealing with every last issue that may arise. Okay? Yeah. Nathan suggests that we recognize that there are 2 doors, and that if there are too many people here to get in, you think about using the other one, and vice versa. Okay? Discussion sections are not meeting this week, so don't worry about them this week. If you need to be in touch with the GSI about something, you can email him, right? They start next week, Monday. You must attend a section to secure your enrollment in the course. Last I checked, there were 47 people on the waitlist for this class. And in past years, it has always worked out such that the waitlist went away on its own, and everybody wanted to take the class, got in, and nobody was turned away. However, if we get to that point in the semester when drop add deadline arrives, and we still have people on the wait list, the GSIs and I are going to sit down and we're going to look at who's enrolled and who's actually coming to section. And if there are people who are enrolled but not coming to section, we are going to drop those people from the class in order to open up spots for people who are on the wait list but not yet enrolled and who are coming to section. So if you don't come to section the first several weeks, you risk losing your position in the class. Granted, if you miss section for some legitimate reason, then let your GSI know. Furthermore, if you are presently enrolled in a section that doesn't work in your schedule, or if for some reason you would like to be in a different section but changing it is impossible because the whole system won't allow that as long as there's a wait list, then please attend the section that you want to be in and talk to your GSI and explain the situation. Tell him which section you are enrolled in, so that the other GSI, if it is the other GSI, who thinks you're in his section, isn't seeing you. We know that you're actually coming to section. Does that make sense? So it's really important to be in section all the time. It's particularly important these first couple weeks. Yeah. So will something be dropped after they don't attend the first section, or will you wait till I'm waiting until the deadline to actually pull this trigger, right? I've never had to pull this trigger before, and I hope I don't have to. It always works out. I guess the other thing I should say is if you're enrolled in the class and you decide you don't want to take it, please drop quickly so that the people who are on the waiting list don't have to suffer so much anxiety waiting to see if they get in. So yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen first week. I'm going to wait as long as I can and hope that the wait list goes away on its own. Yeah. Not really. No, I mean, it might be a little bit longer than it's been in past years, but not by much. The class is capped at what, 145? 140? I may have it in here later. It might be a little bit longer than normal, but not by much. All right, back to this for a second. I want to ask a couple of simple questions. and give you a sense of how we're going to start unpacking this question of population and natural resources. So first, this graph here depicts total world population, right? Aggregated across the entire world. But what does it mean to think of the world as having a single human population? What kinds of assumptions do you have to make for that idea even to make sense, right? Obviously, if you actually go anywhere and look, what you're going to see is a population within some place, right? And very likely, that population's relationship to its natural resource base is not going to be some kind of simple global question, right? It's going to be about a local or a regional water supply rather than the total water on the face of the earth, right? It's going to be about the food, the shelter, the other things that you need for that population. Might it not make more sense then to think about plural populations, which happen to be of certain sizes in certain places and times, with certain endowments of natural resources available to them, and the dynamics at play in the relationship between those populations and natural resources are going to be, in at least some important ways, locally or regionally determined, right? We can now talk about a global economy, global markets for basic foodstuffs and staples, but that's a relatively recent phenomenon, and even that is still subject to local or regional determinations, right? So let's ask ourselves in any given circumstance, to what extent does it make sense to think of the world's human population as a single conceptual unit, rather than an aggregation of multiple and diverse populations, right? You might also then think about, even within a local population, there can be great inequality in the distribution of those resources within that population, right? We know this. In any given place, there might be people who are desperate for natural resources living right nearby people who have got plenty of food, plenty of water, everything they need. To that extent, again, even within a local setting, it might be somewhat misleading to think that there's some kind of single number called the population that has some kind of linear or straightforward relationship to some measure of natural resources. Similarly, when it comes to the habitats, I mean, these populations, if we think in a kind of ecological way, we might postulate that each population has got some kind of habitat that it's relying upon, that it's interacting with, and from which it gets its natural resources. But to what extent is that habitat, I mean, blow it up to the world, we're talking about the globe, right? The whole world, all of its water and land and food and so forth. Does it really make sense to think of the world as a single habitat for this single population? Or is it not, in fact, when you get down to it, a question of highly varied, diverse, variable habitats that are variegated at all different scales, right? Again, even within a single city, you will have a great variety of conditions, circumstances within which different people are living. And those, in many ways, are different habitats. The rich and the poor live in very different habitats in many parts of the world. And we will look into that in a number of different settings over the last 300 years. So if we try to sort of break this down, and again, we're simplifying. We have to simplify just to get started in thinking about these phenomena and relationships between them, right? Humans need food. Humans need shelter. We can think about the different ways in which different populations get their food. Agriculture, hunting and gathering, fishing. We can think about what constitutes adequate shelter for a given population or a given person or family at a given point in time. And we can start looking at buildings and clothing, heat and energy, the other things that affect mortality and fertility. And all of these variables are going to play themselves out in different ways at different times, right? And we want to think about how those different variables relate to each other and how they have changed over time, how they vary. If the Malthusian picture is one of people and food, all this is saying is, wait a minute, in fact, it's not as simple as that. There are all kinds of other things that can become important factors determining that relationship between humans and natural resources in a given place and time. And we can go further. We can start breaking down the environment into water and air and soil, climate, diseases, primary and secondary production. Everyone's comfortable with those terms? What's primary production? Plants. We're talking ecology here. Very basic, simple thing. Primary production is plants. Secondary production is everything after that, right? In the food web. It's what is produced when things consume plants. We start breaking these things apart, and we see in certain places, I mean, you might have plenty of most of these things and not enough of one of them. You might be short of water. At one point in time, that might be what matters. That might have a strong effect on, say, mortality. In fact, it does have a very strong effect on mortality in much of the world. Not so much in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality, right? A contaminated water supply is an incredibly effective way to increase mortality in humans, and it happens every day in much of the world. And that might be completely independent of whether there's enough food or whether there's enough shelter for those people. So at another point in time, it might not be the problem. So these different factors are likely to have moments in which they're important and other moments in which they're not, which makes it very difficult to come to some kind of nice, simple, clean relationship a la Malthus between people and natural resources. It gets even more complicated if you take seriously the variety of ways in which societies are organized. And you think beyond a simple sort of ecology framework, right? It's no longer just about organisms and the environments that they occupy. It's also about the social organization and social relations that describe or characterize those people in that place, right? It might be that a whole lot depends not so much on gross numbers or the amount of arable soil, but how production is organized, how resources are distributed, whether production is organized in the form of feudalism or in the form of wage labor and capitalist markets. We look at those inflection points in the late 18th century and the middle 20th century, and it looks very much as though what matters is social relations and markets and production, not gross numbers, the way you might think of it for the discussion of, well, deer and wolves in a wilderness area, right? Political organization, similarly, whether it's a democracy, whether it's some kind of dictatorship, whether it's colonialism, can have a very strong effect on who gets food, water, shelter, other natural resources, who's got them, who doesn't have them, and why. And we're going to look closely at those types of variables as well. The division of labor, culture, religion. When we read Connolly, one of the big parts of that story concerns the role of the Catholic Church in global debates about population and what is or isn't ethical to do to try to control it. It's not the only player by any means, but it's one of the major players. Demographic processes and patterns. The short answer demographers give to that question, why is the population of the world going to level off at 9 billion or thereabouts in 2050, is something called the demographic transition. Basically, it's the idea that as countries develop or societies develop economically, you initially get a period in which mortality drops. Life expectancy goes up. You secure a better water supply. You secure better housing. You see people living longer because they don't die of diseases at such young ages. You get a dramatic drop-off in infant mortality. And so you get a boom in population. That plays itself out over time for a while, and only later do you start to see fertility decline. You start to see women having on average only 2 or 3 children instead of 5 or 6 or 7 children. That comes later, and only then will you see a leveling off in the rate of growth of population. This is a theory based on the empirical experience of the developed world, the industrial world. Places like Europe and the United States and Japan have been through this demographic transition and set this pattern. And the assumption is that the rest of the world is going to also follow this pattern more or less over time. So we extrapolate forward. We think about how long it'll take for declining fertility to catch up with declining mortality and stabilize the population, and we arrive at this projection of 9 billion or 10 billion. And it's worth understanding that that's how we get to that projection, and it's worth asking, is that a reasonable assumption to make? Will it really play itself out that way? So we're going to stop early today. If this were a normal lecture, we would have had our break about 10 or 15 minutes ago. These are the readings for Thursday. They are available on bSpace. You'll notice that they're pretty short, 4 pages, 2 pages, 13 pages. Are there any other questions? That's it. We'll see you on Thursday.